All right, back with the WMAY morning news feed, 8:44. I'm Greg Bishop. Next guest, somebody who's been tracking ethics at the Illinois State House for quite some time. And Friday, we had action on Senate Bill 539, known as the Ethics Bill. Governor J.B. Pritzker changing one small aspect of that, dealing with executive inspectors general. And to join us to react to that amendatory veto, a minor change that the governor made to this bill, is Reform for Illinois' Alisa Kaplan. She's the executive director. Alisa, thank you for taking time with us this morning. It's always good to hear from you guys because you guys have been at the forefront of talking about some of these required changes to the state's ethics, given what we've seen happen in the past 4 or 5 years or so. So what's your reaction to the governor issuing those changes and telling the state lawmakers to go ahead and concur with those changes? Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's a little surprised and a little disappointed. Surprised in the sense that he did issue this amendatory veto, which is a pretty big step that he doesn't do all the time, but disappointed that it's such a small change that he's making that really has no substantive impact on the bill. To clarify here, what happens with an amendatory veto is the governor says, I'm not signing this now, but if you make this change, I'll sign it. And so as you mentioned, the change that he requested, he said this was just a technical drafting error that needs to be corrected. You gave the executive inspector general a power that they already had, and that's confusing. And so if you fix this, I will sign this bill. And we had really hoped that the governor would, as he had promised in multiple speeches, in his State of the Union speech and in his campaign, really demand better, stronger ethics standards for the people of Illinois, who are frankly tired of just seeing all of this corruption.
Alisa, could he have gone in there and beefed up the revolving door ban? Because as we've talked with you in the past, you'd said that that particular element of this ethics bill has a hole that a semi-truck could drive through. Could he have changed that aspect of the bill?
He absolutely could have. Again, he can't change anything. He can ask the legislature to change things, but he can make recommendations, as he did here. Here he said, if you make this change, I'll sign it. And so he could have said, if you strengthen the revolving door provision in this way, if you strengthen some of these other provisions that we know really need beefing up, then I will sign it, and not until then. And instead, he used this mandatory veto just to ask for this very small technical change. Now, whether the legislature will take that as an invitation to make more changes, we would love to think that, but we don't have any real reason to think that's how they're going to take it. But maybe they will. Hope springs eternal.
So what do you anticipate happening here? They're back tomorrow with a special session dealing with the legislative maps or the revised maps. Is this something you anticipate that they could take up tomorrow and maybe concur with the governor's proposed changes and move this thing along? Because I think, only 5 people voted against it in the House, but I think most of that opposition was because people said that just this does not go far enough. So what do you anticipate happening here?
Yeah, the most obvious thing that will happen, and again, I hope that this isn't what happens, but the most obvious thing that will probably happen is that the legislature will just make that tiny little change and pass the bill again, and the governor will sign it. We would hope that as the legislature, as many leaders in the legislature, and as the governor has said, that if that does happen, this bill will just be a first step towards greater changes. Both the legislative leaders in charge of this bill and the governor have said, well, this bill might not be perfect, but it's just a first step, and we'll continue to work on this. And good government advocates like us, we just want to know, what are you waiting for? We've had scandal after scandal after scandal, including this ComEd scandal that has forced the longest serving Speaker of the House in the country out, Mike Madigan. How much longer are people going to have to wait for real substantive reform? And we're concerned, and again, we hope this isn't true. We hope we can take them at their word. we're concerned that sort of like what happened after the Rod Blagojevich scandal, where some changes were made, some things were strengthened, and they said this is going to be an ongoing process, but nothing really happened. We're concerned that as the spotlight on corruption might fade just a little bit, that ethics will fade into the background and no real changes will get made. Again, we hope that's not the case. We always want, look for the legislature to do the right thing, and certainly there are good people in the legislature that want to do the right thing. We hope that that's what happens and not what history has shown us is too often is the case.
Alisa Kaplan, Reform for Illinois. You talked about the revolving door ban. Just, I guess, if you could bullet point here, what are some of the other major things that you think lawmakers need to tackle that's not included in this bill?
Yeah, the revolving door ban, as you said, just has a loophole that exempts probably the majority of legislators from that requirement. And so, again, that leaves us really at the bottom of the barrel. The vast majority of other states have stronger revolving door bans than we have with this new provision. The strengthening the legislative inspector general, the watchdog who's supposed to investigate potential ethics violations in the legislature, that's something that we've been pushing for years, and we had really hoped to see more movement on here. They did make a change allowing the legislative inspector general to open investigations on her own without asking legislators first, but that was with one hand they gave and with the other they took away. In several key ways, they made it more difficult for her to investigate violations.
And that's one reason why Carol Pope announced that she's no longer going to be the legislative inspector general, calling it a paper tiger and not seeing any substantive reforms.
That's exactly right. She went a little further than that, and she said that this bill shows that the legislature is not serious about ethics reform, and that she's not the first inspector general to say that. The previous inspector general, Julie Porter, who had serious problems and said that the legislature basically didn't let her do her job investigating ethics violations, including burying a report of serious wrongdoing. She said, it's going to be really hard to find somebody good to fill this position because, you can't do your job. And so people who really want to make a difference aren't going to be able to, and they're going to get frustrated or they're just not going to take the job to begin with. So,
yeah, and even Tom Homer, who was the first LIG?
That's right.
He even had problems with the lack of teeth that the office had. So revolving door, issues with the legislative inspector general, and that's the watchdog of the General Assembly. In this bill, it does have some components about more disclosure from lawmakers. Do those go far enough, and maybe just a few other things that you think need to be implemented here in Illinois?
Yeah, we don't believe there are some positive changes in disclosure, and I want to emphasize that there are some other positive changes in the bill in general having to do with lobbying consultants and some other things that we were glad to see in there that we had been pushing for a while. But on disclosure, there's much more that could be done to bring us in line with states like New York or other large states that have had problems like we have. With corruption and conflicts of interest, including more information about the amounts of money that officials make from an outside income that could present potential conflicts of interest. And, those sound super technical, but what we're talking about is making sure that elected officials are paying more attention to the public than they are to their own private interests. And we have to know, the public deserves to know what kinds of conflicts legislators have so they can tell, if they do have the public's interest at heart.
Alisa Kaplan, we'll follow this, of course, to see what ultimately happens, and we'll touch base again in the near future about these and other issues. Greatly appreciate your time, as always. Reform for Illinois, and an organization that's been at the forefront of highlighting not just ethics issues, but also election campaign finance. So that's something else we'll have to talk about in the near future, all right?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Absolutely. 8:53 now. Let's take a break and we'll be back and share with you some Sangamon County COVID-19 testing sites. Just got a statement or information from the county health department, so stay tuned. It's coming up next.
$15 per hour is a lot of cheddar. Culver's West